I have a strained relationship with my father. While he's my biological father, he never truly fulfilled the role of a dad in my life. Growing up, he prioritized his own interests over spending time with our family, often choosing to hang out with his friends or go on vacations without us. He wasn't present for important milestones like birthdays, and when my mom fell ill, he wasn't there to support her during her diagnosis or subsequent passing. For years, he struggled to cope with the loss, neglecting his own well-being and responsibilities. During this time, my maternal grandparents took on the role of caregivers while his own parents provided financial support. Despite his grief, he never made a concerted effort to be a better father to me. However, things took a turn when he met Helena. Despite initially struggling to step up, he eventually became a devoted father figure to her children, who lacked paternal presence in their lives. Witnessing his transformation and his commitment to Helena's kids only deepened my resentment towards him. It felt like a betrayal that he could be a loving and attentive parent to them while neglecting his responsibilities to me. His attempts to reconcile and bridge the gap between us felt insincere, especially when they were prompted by Helena's daughter seeking a sibling-like relationship with me. Despite their efforts to include me in family activities, I couldn't bring myself to accept them as my siblings or my father as a deserving parent. When confronted about my distance, I expressed my frustrations and disappointment in his past behavior. His wife, Helena, intervened, urging me to be more understanding and not dismiss her children's relationship with my father. But I couldn't help but feel resentful and dismissed her interference as unwarranted. I stand firm in my decision not to forgive or forget my father's shortcomings. While others may see me as unreasonable or disrespectful, I can't overlook the years of neglect and emotional absence. It's not about hating Helena's children or their relationship with my father. It's about acknowledging and addressing the hurt I've endured. And until that's acknowledged and rectified, I won't be swayed by pleas for reconciliation or attempts to minimize the impact of his actions. You shouldn't feel pressured to accept Helena's interference. It's evident that your father's past actions have left deep wounds, and it's understandable that you're hesitant to forgive and forget. Helena should reconsider involving herself in this delicate matter and reflect on why she's comfortable with your father assuming a parental role in her children's lives despite his past neglect of you. You have every right to question why your father seems more adept at parenting Helena's children than he was with you. It's a valid concern that deserves clarification. If distancing yourself from your father and seeking solace with your maternal grandparents is what you feel is best, then that's a decision worth pursuing. However, amidst this turmoil, I encourage you to consider seeking therapeutic support if needed. Processing your emotions in a healthy manner is crucial for your well-being and future happiness. While you didn't deserve the neglect you experienced, it's essential not to let bitterness consume you. On another note, it's heartwarming to hear about your inclusive gesture towards Steve, your daughter's boyfriend. Offering to cover his expenses for the trip demonstrates kindness and generosity. It's evident that your family values inclusivity and support, which is truly commendable. We're covering all expenses for the trip, including food and drinks, and we're happy to do so. Up until now, we've never had any disagreements with Steve. However, things took a turn when the topic of accommodations came up while discussing plans with my daughter. It turns out her dorm roommate would be away that weekend, and my daughter intended for Steve to stay with her in the dorm while we visit. I expressed discomfort with this arrangement, stating that while their choices when we're not around are their own, since we're funding the trip, Steve should stay at the hotel. Call us old-fashioned, but as Christians, the idea of them cohabiting during our visit doesn't sit well with us, especially since we're already being generous by inviting him along. When Steve learned of this decision, he confronted me, questioning why he couldn't stay with our daughter. I reiterated our reasons, but he became upset. He attempted to assert his adulthood, but I stood firm, offering him the option to stay with us at the hotel while maintaining separate expenses. He reluctantly agreed, but now my daughter feels embarrassed for him and is considering not joining us. Some have criticized our stance, labeling it as controlling or unnecessary. They argue that as long as we're unaware of their activities, it shouldn't matter where they stay. However, I disagree. By funding the trip, we're not enabling their intimacy, and it's uncomfortable for us to condone it, especially given our religious beliefs. While some may find our position rigid, It's rooted in our values and discomfort with the situation. We've known Steve for 3 years, which is significant, but it doesn't change our stance. Each family has its boundaries, and for us, this is where we draw the line. At 16, I had a falling out with my parents and moved out with my then boyfriend. When my dad begged me to come home, I agreed to a discussion, but things took a strange turn. My mother presented me with a contract outlining rules for staying in their house, including a ban on dating until I moved out. Despite feeling desperate, I couldn't help but find the situation absurd. I felt trapped and vulnerable living with my boyfriend, but signing that contract wasn't the solution. Looking back, I realized that trying to impose their morals on me in exchange for shelter wasn't fair or reasonable. Now, I'm facing a different kind of dilemma regarding finances within my blended family. After my late wife, Cassie, passed away, she left behind a substantial sum of money for our son. This money was meant to cover any medical debts, funeral expenses, and secure our son's future. When I remarried, my current wife, Andy, and I agreed to keep our children's savings separate while managing other expenses jointly. This arrangement worked well until my stepdaughter encountered serious medical issues in September. The surgery she underwent resulted in complications, necessitating costly medications and additional procedures. While we're committed to covering these expenses, the financial strain is significant. My stepdaughter's medical needs are paramount, but the sudden financial burden has raised questions about our family's financial stability and the best way to manage our resources moving forward. When Andy suggested using my son's savings to cover the medical expenses directly, I immediately refused. Despite my objections, she went behind my back and asked my son anyway, causing a heated argument between us. I firmly believe that my son's savings are meant for his future, not to alleviate our financial burdens. Things escalated to the point where my son and I had to move out due to constant fighting with Andy. During the argument, Andy made outrageous claims, including suggesting that my son harbored ill will towards her daughter, which only added fuel to the fire. Now, Andy's parents have joined the fray, accusing me of neglecting my responsibilities by refusing to use my son's money for their benefit. Despite my reassurances that we would cover the expenses, they continue to label me as uncaring and selfish. In reality, I'm deeply upset by Andy's actions. It was inappropriate for her to approach my son for money against my wishes, especially considering the emotional toll it took on him. The fact that she sees his savings as a quick solution to her problems is troubling and disrespectful to my son's late mother, who intended those funds for his future. Instead of resorting to emotional manipulation and pressure, Andy should focus on addressing the financial challenges through proper channels, including seeking support from her daughter's biological father. Her actions have strained our relationship, and until she acknowledges her mistake and apologizes, I'm hesitant to reconcile. She said my son would have plenty left, so why can't we use it? She's fed up with paying these medical bills, which is understandable. But wanting a free handout that isn't hers to request or accept is crossing a line. There are other avenues she could explore, like suing her ex for child support, pursuing malpractice claims against the doctor, or negotiating with the hospital to lower the bills. Maybe it's time for the grandparents to dip into their savings, or do they not care about their granddaughter? But instead of exhausting any of these options, she went straight for my son's savings. I hope you have that money legally protected somehow from a divorce or theft. I think a divorce can't include an inheritance, but with your late wife giving the money before she passed, it might be a different rule. I'm a 26-year-old female who hasn't been in a romantic relationship for years since my last one ended. Finding a partner isn't a priority for me, and I enjoy being independent. However, the rest of my family, especially my brother-in-law, seems to disagree. He's convinced that marriage should be my top priority and that I'm wasting my life away. He's taken it upon himself to set me up with multiple people, some of whom I've entertained, while politely refusing to meet others. Those I did meet were decent enough, and they took rejection well. But the problem is, I simply don't want to be in a relationship. My brother-in-law doesn't think my reasons are genuine and keeps insisting that I haven't met the right person yet. Recently, he sprung a surprise blind date on me during a family dinner. While he usually asks for my consent or at least informs me about such setups, this time was different. When he introduced his friend, I didn't think much of it at first. The guy seemed nice, and it was enjoyable meeting him. However, as the evening progressed, his conversations became increasingly personal, and I began to suspect that I was on a date. It wasn't until later in the night that he hinted at his intentions, revealing that my brother-in-law had orchestrated this as a test for me to see if a friendship could develop into romance. I found this approach incredibly bizarre and called my brother-in-law out on it, which abruptly ended the evening. When I confronted my sister and brother-in-law about it later, my sister was clueless, but my brother-in-law seemed to think he was doing me a favor. I should have given him a chance, considering we got along well. But I shouldn't dwell on it. However, the aftermath is far from over. The friend is upset with my brother-in-law because of that disastrous date. Now, my brother-in-law demands an apology for questioning his good intentions and insulting his friend. Goodness, I detest people like your brother-in-law. He has no right to play matchmaker, and you're entitled to live your life as you see fit, as long as you're not causing harm. Your family's insistence on meddling in your love life only creates unnecessary drama and discomfort. Now, every introduction from them will leave you on edge due to their past actions. They need to reflect on why they're so fixated on your romantic life. Your brother-in-law's behavior is verging on obsession and is downright creepy. Perhaps he has a crush on you or feels threatened by your independence. Regardless, his interference is unwelcome and inappropriate. Ambushing you with matchmaking attempts is unacceptable. You owe neither your brother-in-law nor the other guy anything. Living with the constant fear of surprise setups is unfair, and your brother-in-law needs to abandon his outdated views on women's ambitions revolving around romantic relationships. Your life is yours to live, not theirs to dictate.